Well, hello. Thanks for coming back to check out another video. So we are here today to do a round 2 of talking myself out of these eyeshadow palettes and showing you the dupe palette that I have within my own collection. I did this video sometime back in January. I will leave it linked down in the description box for you in case you missed it. But you guys seem to really enjoy that. Seem to really enjoy seeing what are the palettes I'm pining after and what are the things that I'm shopping my stash for. I really like doing these types of videos because one, it keeps me from buying all of the palettes, which if you saw my February low buy update, you know I'm not doing so well this year with that, but we're not talking about that in this video. Anyway, it does help me to kind of curb that spending because at the end of the day, do I really need 20 green themed eyeshadow palettes? Even though my heart says yes, I'm telling my heart no. So I forget how many I have on my list. I think it's 6 or 7 this time. Last time we did 5. So the other thing, I tried to shop my stash for different dupe palettes than what I used in the previous video. Just a little fun added challenge on my end. But yeah, that is it. I think that is all the rambling that I need to do. I am going to scoot over so that I can show you the picture of the palette that I am pining after. Of course, we can talk about it, pros and cons, and then I'll show you my dupe palette, much like we did in the last video. And yeah, I hope you guys are excited, and let's just get on into this. Okay, so I feel like I have, again, a mix of older palettes that I'm pining after. I think one of them might even be a discontinued palette, which is good for my wallet because then I can't get it. And then I do have some newer release palettes that have been released this year. So this first one is from Athr Beauty. This is the Crystal Moonstone palette, Crystal Quartz palette. You're gonna see the name on the screen as well as the picture. This is super pretty. I think that this released sometime in the winter of 2021, which was a really appropriate time for a color story like that to release, if you want my humble opinion. So I have never tried anything from Athr Beauty, and I really don't hear a lot of things, good or bad, about them as a brand. And I am just trying to be a bit more picky about things that I want, brands that I want to explore. Do I want to saddle myself with an eyeshadow palette that I'm probably never going to finish off in its lifetime and not like it? You know what I mean? If you buy a new foundation and you end up not liking it, hopefully it's not that terrible. I can use it up. You know what I mean? The commitment to a foundation is not the same as a commitment to an eyeshadow palette from an unknown brand to you. So let me know if you've just tried anything from Athr Beauty. I'm super curious. The other con to this, I did actually, y'all are gonna be so proud of me. I was in TJ Maxx and I always peruse the makeup section. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. It's I can't go in that store without doing it. So anyway, at my TJ Maxx, they actually had 2 of these palettes sitting there. And I picked them up, I opened it up just to see, because TJ Maxx is really bad for having shattered things. So it's not their fault. I realize it's just the name of the game. But anyway, I always check the stuff. So I did just open this up. It was $12. It was really tempting me. But when I opened it up, to be quite honest, one, super awkward pan sizes and shapes. Okay, maybe I should have realized this from the picture. Those triangle pans, I just don't like it. Please, can we just have circle or square pans? Why does every palette want to be edgy and unique and have these weird pan shapes? Stop it. Circles or squares, that is all we need, and magnetic. No more of this fake tin, I don't know, aluminum tin stuff. Anyway, so the pan size is really awkward. If you're someone who's going to hit pan on a shadow, that triangle shape is going to be quite hard to actually get into those corners. But 2, in person, this palette is a lot smaller than I thought it would be. It's shockingly smaller. So yeah, I don't know the grams or the weight on this. I could look it up and probably provide it on the screen for you. But it's just, after seeing it in person, that also really helped me not want it. But the color story is still sucking me in. You know what I mean? So I did shop my stash. I did find something that I think is pretty good. Now, also let me say, with that Moonstone palette, the darker side of the palette is what is drawing me in. Not so much the lighter side. Like, I think it's a very nice, well-rounded palette, but it very much is that darker side is what I'm pining after. So that's kind of how I went about picking my dupe palette. So I have in my collection the BH Cosmetics September Birthstone palette, which was the Sapphire palette. I can open this up for you. I really feel like this is a great palette to dip into and pull from. I'm still trying to like figure out where should I hold these palettes so that you can see them. Anyway, I think this is a really good one to pull out and use and to accomplish like getting the vibes of that darker side of that Athr Beauty palette. So this is what I will be pulling out anytime that I am pining after that palette. Okay, the next palette on my wish list is from Melt Cosmetics. This is currently discounted at Sephora for $10 off, which isn't a lot, but sale's a sale, you know? So anyway, it is the Millennial Pinx palette. This palette is on the older side, and so I've like skirted getting it this long that I'm just like, keep skirting it, Haley. You don't need it. So I have had in my life the 420 palette from Melt. There were some really great shades within that palette, but some of the shades that I really wanted that palette for just didn't work. They didn't do it for me. I didn't like it. And then I've heard like other people who like actually review makeup for a living here on YouTube. I've heard them say that like the Melt formula is super inconsistent, that the 420 palette wasn't a good palette to represent the brand, blah, blah, blah. I also hear those things about the Millennial Pinx palette. So I'm just kind of hesitant, like even though that color story speaks to me, Melt is not a brand whose formula works for me. Like I did, you know, I've been burned by them. So the 420 palette burned me. And then also I did in the month of February purchase their new palette, which is the Amore Mariposa palette. And that was like the reviews on that. Everyone was saying like, oh, this is like the best Melt formula. This is the great Melt formula. Like if you've wanted to try them and you were waiting, like go, if this is the color story, get this palette. So I did because I really did like that color story and I wanted to try them because everyone seems to rave about them. But again, it's like the 420 palette. Some of those shadows in there are duds in my opinion. So long way of saying, do I really want to waste my money on a third Melt palette? No, that would just be insanity, right? Also, let me tell you, I have some pinky toned palettes in my collection. You're going to see them when I show you the dupe palette. How many times has Haley used her pinky toned or pink themed eyeshadow palettes this year? None. Or slim to none, like maybe once or twice. So why am I like pining after this pink palette, pink and gray? I think it's a little bit that it's a unique color story. But anyway, why am I pining after this palette when at the end of the day, it's really not that unique? I mean, it's a unique mashup of doing pinks and grays together. But at the end of the day, pinks and grays are not all that unique. So I have these shades represented over and over again. I could pull them out and dupe this palette. And it's just, you know, I kind of lost my train of thought with that one. I'm not going to lie to you guys. Anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is that at the end of the day, like, I just don't need this palette. I don't know why I'm pining after it, especially when I have pinks and grays in my collection, and I'm not even reaching for them right now. So my dupe palettes, I have two to like dupe this out, both from Natasha Denona. So the first one is the Love palette, which I'm sure you guys are all quite familiar with. This is a discontinued palette at this point, unfortunately. But yeah, you can just see that's a lot of pink shades in here, looking very similar to that Melt one. And I actually really like the Natasha Denona formula way more. It's one of my, I would say it's probably my favorite bougie formula. And so if that's a formula that I love and I'm struggling to reach for the pinks in this palette, like, don't add any more into your life. So I could accomplish a look from that palette, get all the pinks that I need from this palette. Also, another one that I just didn't bring in here, the ABH Jackie Aina has quite a few good pink shades in it as well. And then to accomplish like getting those gray tones that I want, this I feel like actually is a pretty good spot on dupe. These gray tones do lean, in my opinion, a little bit more on that blue-gray side, which is what I feel like you also get from the Millennial Pinx palette. So this is the Natasha Denona Mini Xenon palette. And as you can see, it's just like a black, a gray, a silver shimmer, and then two, like a lighter gray, and then like an eggshell kind of white shade. So pairing both of these together would definitely give me the Millennial Pinx vibes. And this is what I need to do in order to like just curb that spending, not buy that, because again, I refuse to be burned by melt for a third time. Okay, so this next palette is a palette that was released in January of 2021. This is from Urban Decay. This is the Wild Greens palette. So it's a green eyeshadow palette. Of course, it's going to be on my wish list. I love green eyeshadow. But again, do I need 20 green eyeshadow palettes? No, I do not. The other thing, I love my Wild West palette from Urban Decay, but I find that Urban Decay shadows are more misses than they are hitses. Or more misses than they are hits. So like, I feel like for every good release that they have, like Wild West, in my opinion, good release, then the next 2 to 3 are going to be bad releases. So I've heard super polarizing, super mixed reviews on this palette. Some people say like it's patchy, it doesn't blend well, you can't layer up the shadows, because that is a thing that I like to do personally. I do like to layer up and build up my shadows, and especially build mattes on top of each other to really achieve the kind of depth that I want. I don't think you can do that with this palette. Also, this palette doesn't really have a lot of depth to it at the end of the day. It's very like same kind of undertone, in my opinion, at least from what I've seen. Now again, it's a little bit different looking at pictures and watching videos than like seeing something in person, but I just feel like the depth of this palette isn't there for me. And so at the end of the day, like I really don't want this. I don't need this. That's kind of like the whole running theme of this video, isn't it? So my green palette that I'm actually going to be reaching for to like help curb that is one that I do think has a really good formula. Like this is such a great formula, such an underrated palette in my opinion. So this is of course the Avocado Toast by BH Cosmetics, and the background of this is like super holographic. So I don't know how well the camera is going to be able to like pick up on it. Maybe if I just hold it back here. I feel like, so while this isn't like a spot on dupe to the Urban Decay Wild Greens palette, I feel like this is a better color story of like a Wild Greens palette, a Wild Avocado palette, if you will. This you can do a lot more with. You do get the good variety of having like the Pinx, and that palette, that Urban Decay palette is missing that, and not even in my opinion, like it just is, you can see from the pictures. But this palette also, there's a lot more depth to this. Like you have Pit here, which is this great like kind of chocolatey brown. You do have a black shade in this one. Paprika is a great, it's like a mid-tone red. Like this, it has its own depth to it, of course, but then the Pit shade has more depth to it, like it's darker. So layering those two together is really nicely. And then with even in the matte greens, so Ripe and Guac here are kind of in the same green family, but again, one is like a lighter green and the other one is like a darker, so you could really go in for a great monochromatic look. And then Avo Toast and Superfood are both more in that like khaki army green family, and they do have different depths to them. So I just really think this is a better, well-rounded palette, and I think that at the end of the day, it's just going to be anytime a brand releases a green-themed palette, it's obviously going to catch my eye. I didn't have to pull out the Avocado Toast. I could have pulled out, you know, the Kaleidos Sci-Fi Green. I could have, you know, there's probably 1,002 other ones in my collection that I could have pulled out to satisfy the itch of a green palette, because I do have enough of them. But it's just something, it's a color story that is always going to catch my eye. Okay, so this next palette is from Viseart. Now, when I look at their website, this palette is still listed, but it is always sold out. So I am not sure if they are going to restock this or not. So this is what I was talking about. There might be like this one discontinued palette. I think this might be it, which would be great because then I can't buy it. So I really just, I don't know what it is. I have just really been loving like darker mattes and making like really nice colorful eyeshadow looks. Like it's just been so much fun. And so that's what's drawing me in with this palette. It's just the color story. Also, I do hear people really rave and say high praises about the Viseart formula. And this is the only palette of theirs that really speaks to me and what I would want from an eyeshadow palette. But I am interested in trying that brand because I have heard such good things about them. So if this palette is actually discontinued, then I'm gonna have to wait a while longer to try out Viseart because again, nothing else speaks to me. Anyway, this is one of their like smaller, I think they call them the edit palettes. So if I'm not mistaken, one, this is smaller, like travel friendly, you know, but two, it's got a combination of a few different shades across a few different palettes, I think, which doesn't bother me because obviously I don't own any Viseart, so it's not like I would already have like that represented in another Viseart palette. But back to the size of it. So this is a $39 palette, I believe, which isn't a bad price. Don't get me wrong. However, I cannot find the weight of this online, and I have seen some of their smaller, what was the palette? Oh, the Petite Produit. I have seen that in person, and it's like the size of a credit card. So I don't know the size of this Dark Edit palette, and is it going to be cost effective? Because while most people probably aren't out there finishing off eyeshadows and hitting pan on them, you know, there are those of us who do, and so that is something that I do want to consider. I don't want like too much product, like 2 grams of product from 129 Natasha Denona palette is too much, but then I also don't want too little product to where it's not good value for my money, because I could potentially hit pan and use up shadows. So anyway, if you've seen this in person, let me know. Or if you have tried any of the Viseart palettes, let me know what your favorite one is, because I'm just super curious. Anyway, my dupe palette, it's kind of funny because it's the Melt Amore Mariposa palette, even though I told you guys, like, I'm almost scorned by this palette. I do have to say, I do really enjoy the color story of this. And like I said, there's just some dud shades. I think the reason this is the most disappointing, just in case you want to know, is these like matte green shades up here. I have a really hard time getting to work. But anyway, this is going to be my dupe palette for the, if I could hold this in frame, for the Viseart Dark Edit palette. And I think you can kind of see why. It does have these nice like darker purples down here. And then I feel like it's got some of the like more neutrally shades that you do see in that palette as well. So I feel like this is just, and again, have a lot of those like darker, colorful mattes just represented throughout my collection. I really could have probably picked like a bunch of different palettes, but I wanted to go with this one specifically because if I'm pining after that Dark Edit palette, then I need to reach into this one so that I can really like begin to understand this formula and like work with it and, you know, make this palette work for me, because it wasn't really expensive, like regret, if it's going to be a regret, you know. So yeah, that is why I wanted to include this one as my dupe palette for that. And I do think that, like I said, I think this does have some very like similar vibes, spot on kind of colors, especially like, I feel like one of the selling features of that Dark Edit palette is it does have that like really nice green shimmer in it. And I do have to say, this green shimmer up here in the corner is quite lovely. I have used this. So yeah, this will be the palette that I reach into for the Viseart palette. Okay, 3 more palettes. So I have never tried Sydney Grace. It is a brand that is on my radar. I am always interested, like I do have a running list of like brands that I would like to try, but I don't want to just try them to try them. I want to try them when something actually speaks to me. That way I'm making like the best conscious decision and purchase for myself, if that makes sense. So anyway, their palette that really speaks to me is the Summer Days palette, and it's the dark version. I don't really care for the light version, but the dark version, it is just so pretty and so drool worthy, but it's a neutral palette. So one, I haven't worn, I mean, I've started wearing neutrals a little bit more now, but only because the Juvia's Place The Warrior palette is a palette that I currently have going in like a project pan to like to use it a certain amount of times. So other than that, I really haven't reached for a ton of neutral eyeshadows. It's been more colorful eyeshadows. So how much use am I going to get out of this? I'm sure I will cycle back around to really wanting to wear neutrals, but just right now in my life, like I'm not. So why do I need to bring in another neutral palette? I don't. And then on that same vein, neutral palettes are easy. You know what I mean? Like, I don't mean that to sound like offensive, but they're just, that's like the easy palette for the brand to put out. And so I want to wait around. Like if I'm going to try something out from them, I really do want it to be like on the more colorful side. It's just their other palettes that they have that do lean more colorful don't really speak to me at this moment. So this one does though, however, but at the end of the day, it is just a neutral palette. No shade in there is going to be unique or different than any shade that I already own. So I have 2 palettes here that I can show you these are like my top 2 neutral, like neutral dark palettes, like that one is right now. So the first one is the Natasha Denona Glam Face palette. I do have mine in the dark shade. I'm trying to close my flap so my cream products are not exposed. But anyway, this is what this palette looks like. I think you can tell, like this alone, even though this is less shades, like the Sydney Grace is 9 shades, I feel like you could do the same amount of looks, the same kind of looks, even with just these 5 shades from this palette. And I really do enjoy this. It is a nice palette to work with. It is very dark and very pigmented, which I feel is like what you would get from that Sydney Grace dark palette. And then also just to kind of round it out, because the dark one does, I guess the benefit of that one that like the Glam Face palette doesn't necessarily have is that the dark palette, while it's still dark, it does appear to seem to have like a lighter golden shade within it, which is really pretty and could make for like a nice inner corner highlight or a nice lid shade. And with this dark palette, like, which is fine, it's the dark palette, like I knew that going into it. I'm not like saying this is like a con of this palette for me, but there is no like inner corner highlight shade. There's no like light golden shade. So if I'm wanting that kind of vibe from it, then I need to pull out this and pair it with a light golden shade. And so the palette I would reach into to find that would be the Warrior by Juvia's Place. So again, the background of this is super reflective. I don't know how well the camera is going to be able to register it, but maybe if I bring it back here. So you do have Bakwa here. You have More Me, which is the middle shade. I'm not trying to butcher these names. I'm really trying my hardest to pronounce them right. And then you have Ida up here in the center. So I feel like these 3 are really, and the mattes too within here, are really good spot on representations of what you would find in that Sydney Grace palette. Okay, this next palette, as I'm sitting here filming this palette is also on sale at Ulta, and it's kind of like, it's eating away at me. I'm not gonna lie. It's the LA Girl Festie Bestie. The name is a little bit cringy, I'm not gonna lie. Maybe that's part of the reason I'm like, don't buy this. Anyway, I have in the past owned an LA Girl palette. It was the Main Stage palette, which was like their blue, green, purple palette. Very lovely color story, but the mattes in there were not so lovely. Those blue shades were what really drew me in with that Main Stage palette, and they were a little bit patchy, harder to work with. Like, it just wasn't the greatest, but the shimmers from LA Girl are quite lovely. Like, I do really enjoy them. And I feel like blue is just a hard eyeshadow to like formulate, so I don't really want to hold that against them. This palette, the Festie Bestie, is more of like a pinky purple orange pinky purple orange green with like a little like what looks like a kind of grungy blue shade down there in the corner. So I feel like this palette might be a little bit better formulated because those colors typically tend to be easier to formulate. However, you do run the risk. It could just be that their matte formula is not that good and it's going to be patchy and hard to work with. And so you're really only buying this palette for the shimmers. That's a drawback. So also, while I liked that LA Girl palette, the Main Stage palette specifically the shimmers, I do not feel like the LA Girl eyeshadow palette is worth $16. Now, like I said, I know it's on sale right now, so technically you could get it for like a deal, but I just, at the end of the day, it's probably not going to be on sale forever. So 16 is just, that's more than what I would personally pay for an LA Girl eyeshadow palette. So I do have 2 here that I can show you where I feel like I get pretty good like color representation of that palette. So the first one is the Tribe from Juvia's Place. Again, super reflective background. Can we stop doing that in palettes? So I know like within the LA Girl palette, there's like that really pretty like kind of fluorescent, this is a hard word for Haley, fluorescent leaning shadow. Like the limey green. So you do have that in the Tribe palette. You do have a great matte orange here. And then you've got, what is it called? Cuba is the like blue shadow. I feel like that is a good like representation of the blue shade that I'm seeing in like the bottom corner of the LA Girl palette. So I feel like this and paired with the Festival palette would satisfy the itch that I have for that Festie Bestie. And I enjoy the Juvia's Place formula much more than I did the LA Girl formula, obviously, because I don't have the LA Girl palette anymore, and I still have these Juvia's Place palettes. So I think you can very much see like the pinky vibe in this palette that you could represent or get, you know, dupe from the other palette. And then this one does have a nice blue as well. So, and it's got these, I don't know if like the camera picks it up, but this is like a peachy kind of orangey shade. And then this one is like a, not a pumpkin orange, but it's just, I don't know how to describe it, kind of like a red orange. But anyway, I feel like those are good representations of like the orange part of that LA Girl palette. So there's my dupe palettes for that one. Okay, so this last one I was hesitant to include because it is a like influencer collab palette, and I don't want anyone to get offended. I think that it is always amazing when someone gets an opportunity like that. So I am in no way like, you know, coming after them or saying that this is a bad palette. I'm just saying this palette really catches my eye. However, I don't think that it's all that unique when I take a step back and look at it. So please don't take that in the wrong way. So this is the Glamlite Mikayla palette, I think is her name. I don't follow her. I don't really know who this is, but this palette did catch my eye. So I like the Glamlite formula. Laura very sweetly sent me the Cake palette. I do have to say, their shimmer formula, you either need to spray your brush or put down some type of glitter glue type primer. Now I always put down my NYX glitter glue, but I think it's just nice to know what you're getting into. So their formula I think is nice. Is it my favorite indie formula? No. But am I completely turned off by the brand? By no means. I just wanted to put that out there because that is one of the things that I'm like, well, you like their formula, but it's not like a favorite formula, so do you really need another palette? Like it's one of those like little mind tricks I will use to talk myself out of this. Anyway, this is a larger palette, obviously. I do have larger palettes in my collection. The two dupe palettes are larger palettes, which is kind of funny. Anyway, I have found like here recently, I've been gravitating more towards smaller palettes, not necessarily like 5, 6, or even 9 pan palettes, but just something like 10, 12, maybe around in there. 16, I think is my sweet spot, to be quite honest. And I know 16 is still a lot of eyeshadow, but that's like half the amount of shadow that is in this palette. So within this palette, those first 2 rows are super neutral leaning, and that is not the reason that I want this palette at all. Like I could care less for those top 2 rows. So right there, like that's a good chunk of the palette that I really I'm not like interested in. It's gonna go underutilized, so I don't really need it for that sense. The part that really draws me in are those mustardy, like yellowy green looking shades and the purples. I just think that they are super pretty. I think that it's, anytime like you compare those 2 colors together, it gives me like Disney villain vibes, but I'm here for it. Like I really love a good purple and a good green together. So, and anyway, I do have the Glamlite Cake palette here to show you because I feel like this palette up here in the corner with like the purpley shades, I feel like that is a good representation of what is in this Mikayla palette. So I don't really need to add that into my life. Also, you've got like the blues in here, and if I'm not mistaken, there are like some blue shades in that palette as well. So I feel like I could just dip into this and really come right here and like right in here and get that purple blue itch from that palette. And then the green palette that I'm going to show, ooh, almost dropped this. I should be a lot more careful. Anyway, the other palette to like dupe that Glamlite palette, this is from BH Cosmetics. This is the Lit List palette. This was their holiday 2021 release. Now, when I open this up, you're going to look at this and you're going to be like, Haley, you're crazy. Like this does not look at all like that palette. But I feel like if you kind of rearrange this palette, you think about it differently, then you can see what I'm going for. So again, this does actually have 2 neutral like rows to it. I know these neutrals are a bit different than the neutrals in that palette, but it's still there. So I feel like if you take this green row and these blues right down here, look at that again, just the greens and the blues. I feel like those are the greens and the blues that you find in the Glamlite palette. So, and I really do enjoy the BH Cosmetics formula, and I'm happy to like get more use out of these like larger palettes. Like I already have 2 larger palettes here in my collection, and while I really like them, they're not something that I'm in the like market to get rid of by any means. They very much have a place in here. Larger palettes are just unfortunately going to be the less like utilized palettes within my collection. So anytime I can give myself a push to pull these out and use them, I think is a great thing. But yeah, that is it. That is all the palettes that I am currently panning after, lusting over, drooling over, however you want to say it. Let me know down below. Did we lust after any of the same palettes? Do you have a good dupe palette within your collection for it? Or are you just lusting after something else? Because I would love to know that too. Thanks guys so much for sticking with me until the end, staying around. I know this was like a little bit of a longer video, but we all know I'm long-winded, so let's end it here. I hope you're having a good day, a good night, or a good whatever, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.